am of Japanese descent, and each year I go to visit my family in the north of Japan, and also do the Oban, which is basically like the Day of the Dead in Japan, when the spirit of the dead come to visit the land of the living. During this period, I decided to go visit Kyoto a little, and long story short, after walking for a while out of the city, I began climbing a nearby mountain to discover a substantially sized cemetery. Being a young lad of 16 at the time, I decided I'd go exploring and see which families are interred here. It was about 3 p.m. and it was scorching, and the trees here and there in the cemetery bore a welcoming shade for me to cool down a little. After about 10 minutes or so of looking around the very old stone slabs, I realized a few odd details. First, it seems I somehow got lost in the cemetery. Mind you, I have an excellent sense of geolocalization, and I found my way out of many a forest, mountains, airports, and such. The cemetery itself was lower in its middle part and surrounded by woods, so I think I was in the lower part because the horizon was only tombs. Secondly, it was getting dark. As I said before, it was around 3 p.m., so that was very odd, and the surroundings had that yellowish tinge you get at dusk. If I make a small cultural parenthesis, dusk is called Totso Geredoki in Old Japanese, and it's supposed to be the in-between moment when strange things occur. Not a good time to be surrounded by tombs. Third, I was getting a little cold. Not like I was plunged in an icy pool, but more like when you're in the middle of the mountains and you can feel some coldness through the gaps of your coat. After that, I began to see some weird shadows or something on the corner of my eyes. Very weird because I wasn't feeling panicked or anything, and I could calmly observe them. It was moving like these old lava lamps, very deliberately, and sometimes looked to be like human shapes or huge faces. I was walking toward it because I thought it can harm me physically, and I can certainly punch it, but it was like a mirage and it was fluttering. After a while, I started to feel like I was in danger, and I was getting colder and colder. And at this moment, I saw a monk, who was very surprised to see me there because the cemetery was supposed to be closed at this hour. He brought me back to the entrance, and I told him it was open when I got in. He informed me that he was next to it all day and didn't see me pass by. I assume he thought I went in for a fraction, so I told him everything I saw and felt. He seemed very surprised at first and then told me to look at the hour. It was 6:10 p.m. That means I was there for like 3 hours. He then told me I shouldn't come here while the sun is setting, that I could have been taken away by Kamikakushi. Anyway, it was a very weird experience there, and I suggest to everyone that you don't enter any cemeteries, let alone the cemetery east of Kyoto, near the Shogunzuka Mountain, near dark. There's this hill near my hometown, beautiful with lots of forest and a gigantic tower on top. There's always wild parties on the top of that hill, but other than that, locals seem to kind of avoid this hill. Some even say there's something wrong with the forest up there. Nearly no wildlife and people, especially hikers, say there's weird stuff happening. I was always a bit skeptic towards those people and wrote it off as drunk people hearing stuff that's not there, etc. Until today. Me and my friend got invited to one of those parties on top of the hill. The drive up there is already quite adventurous because the streets are snowy, the turn's narrow, and on one side of the road is a 10-meter drop. So better drive carefully. We listened to music on our way up, had a great time when suddenly my car horn honked 3 times, just like that. We were both so confused. And the thing with my car horn is that you have to sucker punch that thing to even get a little beep out of it, so there's no pressing it on accident. But alright, it's an old car, could be a malfunction, who knows. We kept going, already a bit creeped out, until like 5 minutes later when we suddenly heard something scratch the roof of my car. But it didn't sound like a tree branch or something. The scratch was quite consistent, and the scratches were always like 3 seconds apart. Pretty loud too. And there weren't any tree branches low enough to reach the roof of my car anyways. We started to get scared. but there's no way to turn around on that street, so we just had to keep going until we reached the top. Initially, we had planned to park the car there and walk the last part to the party because there's not really a road, but we were both so scared that we decided to turn around and just drive home. On our way back, nothing really happened until we reached the part of the road where we heard the scratching on our rooftop. And I kid you not, in the fresh snow on the street were footprints. 3 perfectly straight rows of footprints. I don't know if they led from the forest to the other side of the road where the 10-meter drop is, or from the drop to the forest, but either way, that's creepy, man. Of course, we sped down that hill like Satan was trying to tickle our bums. I dropped my friend off, and I'm home now, but still shaking. I'm usually not someone to be like, yeah, that's definitely paranormal, but this stuff is just too weird. I can't find any logical explanation for this. I mean, sure, the car horn could have been a crazy coincidence, but the scratching and the footsteps, and everything with the number 3 car honks, 3 seconds between the scratches. I mean, that could be my imagination. Maybe it was 2 seconds, but who knows? I didn't look at my watch or anything, and also the 3 rows of footprints. Do you guys have any explanation for me? Like anything at all, because at this point, I'm really creeped out. My mom is a scientist. She doesn't spontaneously do anything. She is used to careful planning, organization, and preparation. However, with this house, she threw that all away. After looking at it online, she went to visit 2 days later and bought it a week after that, despite it only being 10 minutes away from our old house, and the old house being perfectly fine. That was the first strange thing. When I finally came home from college and came into the house for the first time, I felt weird. Now, I used to be a skeptic, but now I'm not so sure. Unlike most houses or places I stay where I hate it only when I'm alone in the dark, this house is just creepy regardless of the time of day. The basement is unfinished and eerily dark despite dozens of lamps and lights. The first floor is stuffy and it feels crowded, and the second floor almost feels depressed, like there's an overwhelming sadness that lingers like cigarette smoke. But throughout the whole house, it feels like you're being watched from around the corner. It's as if there's someone peeking around the door frames and walls, staring at you, waiting for you to do something. It's extremely paranoia-inducing, and it's throughout the entire house. Day or night, rain or shine, it's a constant. It wouldn't be strange if it was just me feeling this, but my brother and mother admit to feeling the same sort of paranoia or depression, especially upstairs. Now, there are some strange things that have happened. My cat sometimes is scared of the upstairs. One time I brought her upstairs into my room. She clawed her way out of my arms and darted under my bed. I couldn't lure her out with cat treats. I had to drag her out using my baseball bat, and when I did, her tail was all bushy and her pupils were blown. My mom doesn't believe in ghosts at all, but after coming to this house, she constantly talks about the fairies in the house that live in the basement, and when upstairs, she talks to Charlie. When I ask her why, she says, just in case. My mom said that one morning she saw the cat up on her hind legs and just batting randomly at the air for over 10 minutes. When I was home alone during the day, I wanted some water, so I left my room and was in the hallway when I heard a clear whistle. It was impossible to miss, and wasn't the house creaking or anything because it had a distinct sound. It went from high to low pitch like a mocking whistle. My brother lost his wallet one time. I saw him leave it on the countertop in the kitchen, and then, hours later, he couldn't find it no matter how hard he looked. My mom told him to go downstairs and ask the fairies to give them back. My brother hesitantly went to the basement and said he apologized and asked for his wallet back, and 10 minutes later, it was sitting on the edge of the countertop. My brother rarely comes home. He's 5 years older than me and lives at my dad's apartment because my mom kicked him out for doing drugs constantly and not paying rent. But whenever he does come over, the cat starts acting really protective or possessive of herself. She doesn't like him to pet her and always whines whenever he does. My mom told my brother that the fairies don't like him and that he should apologize. This one doesn't have much credibility because my brother does a lot of drugs and stuff, but he swears that when he was walking downstairs from first floor to the basement, someone shoved him on the stairs and he nearly fell. And then, a little later in the basement, he said that he felt something directly behind him, standing over him, and he had never been so scared in his life. Let me know what you guys think. There's definitely not enough evidence to outright say this place is haunted, and I'll need a lot more concrete evidence, not just feelings and vibes, but it is a weird place. To give a bit of backstory before I begin, I am currently 25 years old. I grew up in Washington State. For a number of years I lived with my grandparents and my mom after we lost our home. This incident takes place 7 years ago, but I've had weird stuff I've considered paranormal happen ever since I was little. At the time, we lived in my grandmother's house, which we returned to after 5 or so years living away from there. When I was a kid, there was tons of stories surrounding ghosts and creepy stuff that happened to both my sister and my brother. A lot of this stuff my grandma would dismiss as nonsense and tell them to shut up about it. There's plenty of stories I can tell later if people are interested, but right now I'll focus on the latest big one. At my grandma's house, I took the guest room and made it my own. This room was fairly small and had a long, thin closet only a few feet away from the foot of my bed. Inside was mostly old stuff my grandma kept inside as storage after my grandpa passed away, but she's kept a lot of her own personal belongings there in plastic containers for years, stuff like fabrics, old dresses, photo albums, etc. A few months after we moved in, I started to hear creepy sounds from the closet, stuff falling over, shuffling, or sliding against the door. My grandma would check occasionally, but nothing would be out of place. Eventually, every so often, I would hear a music box playing from inside the closet late at night. It wasn't anything startling, but every single time it would happen, I'd feel deeply uneasy and walk out to the living room to watch old shows with my grandma to avoid it. My mom and grandma would tell me I was just hearing things, and for the most part, I agreed, since the year prior I officially found out I suffer from night terrors. I figured that hearing things was part of it, and I started sleeping with headphones on, blasting my music. And this continued all the way up till a night when I was 18. I had a Skype group of online friends that I would hang out with, and we'd often stay up super late posting memes and playing games, and this would wind down with us having talks at night until we got tired. Now up till this point, the only people who knew about the music box stuff was my mom, my older brother, and my grandma, and no one else. We all stayed up one night and I accidentally fell asleep in the Skype call, passed out on my mic in bed, and all that good stuff. When I woke up the next morning, everyone made jokes at my expense and told me all about how loudly I snored and moaned in my sleep. But my friend at the time, Brian, piped up and joked about kicking something and a music box playing in the background. Everyone who stayed up that night said the same thing and said the music box music got louder, like it got close to my microphone. Naturally, I freaked out about this and asked if anyone could tell me what it sounded like, and my friend Hannah hummed the exact song I had been hearing from the closet. I told them all about it, and they all agreed that it was terrifying. When my grandma woke up, I asked her to find the music box in the closet and remove it. She dug through each one of the boxes in the stack and found it in the middle container, buried under old paper and clothing she packed away. She took it to her room, and I never heard the music again. I kept multiple things stacked in front of the closet for years after until I moved out. And to this day, every time I remember it, I get really uncomfortable. Like I said, I have more stories to tell from both me and my siblings from stuff that happened over our childhoods, if anyone is interested, but I'd be interested in your guys' thoughts on this. So growing up, I went to a pretty big and well-known Boy Scout camp in Ohio. The staff would always tell stories of ghosts and omens in the camp. The camp had a heavy Native American influence. I always thought these were just stories. One summer I worked there and experienced a lot of things for myself. I will share a few stories but won't write them all due to the amount unless people want to hear more. A few notes about the camp here. This camp does not have much electricity, with a few exceptions, and the campsites were just canvas tents, an open pavilion, and a latrine. Troops stay there for a full week and then new troops come for the next week. First story is about a man named Hutch. Hutch was one of the founders of the camp and I believe was a camp director long ago. It was always told that after taps was played, curfew for the camp, and a scout was out of their campsite, he would walk with them. He would try to direct you in the correct way to get back to your campsite. If you heard footsteps to your left, he would want you to turn left. If you heard them in front of you, he would want you to keep going. If you heard them behind you, he wanted you to turn around, and so on. If you heard him walking, it was said that you could say, "It's okay, Hutch, I know my way," and he would leave. Flash forward to when I worked there. The paths in the woods to get back to the staff site were flooded, so myself and 2 other staff walked a main road to get to them. Scouts were not allowed to go near this road for their safety, and they had no reason to. As soon as we reached the road, we started hearing footsteps. At first, they were to our left, which was where the path was. Once we started walking on the road, they were behind us. Not sure if we were just hearing things, we stopped. There were a couple of more steps behind us, then they stopped. We continued and tried a few more times with almost the exact same results every time. Finally, one of the guys I was with stops and says, "It's okay, Hutch. We know our way." And the steps start to walk away. We continued on and didn't hear them the rest of the time. Second story involves our radios. Only higher-up staff got them, and only one of the 3 female staff members had one. One night, a female voice comes through the radio and is crying and screaming for help. A silent emergency, an emergency only certain staff members know about, was issued and a head count was performed. The crying and pleas for help keep coming through the radio every few minutes. One staff member goes to the tent the female staff member is in and discovers her still asleep with her radio sitting on the charger. The emergency was canceled, and to this day, no one can explain it. The final story I will share involves the omens. One omen is of a white wolf with red eyes that, when seen, means something bad will happen over the course of the summer. The other is a white doe with blue eyes that brings a good summer. During our opening staff week, we were setting up camp and it had gotten late at night. Only a few staff were still out working. One of the last ones comes back, a program director, and joins a few of us sitting by the fire. Everyone says hi, but immediately notices this worried, scared look on his face. When asked about it, he doesn't want to talk, but finally tells us because we were all directors and assistant directors. He tells us that while coming back, he felt an overwhelming cold sensation, and when he turned around, he saw the white wolf standing on the path behind him. We all wondered about what it was warning us about. Everything was good until Scout Week 2 of 7. A few scouts got very sick, but it happened, so no one batted an eye about it. The next week, significantly more scouts get sick, and it just keeps getting worse every week. Staff were getting sick, and whole campsites were quarantined. We called in health departments from several counties to help us solve the problem, but no one could figure out why this was happening. They even did soil and water tests all around the camp. I fully believe the white wolf was warning us about it. I'm a believer in the supernatural. Despite my belief, I have never believed in black-eyed children, even though I've always been fascinated by them. They just didn't make any sense to me. It seemed simultaneously random and contrived. Nevertheless, I've always thought of them as fascinating and hope to someday use them in a story. I never imagined that I'd be telling a true story about one. Very few authors make enough money for selling books to support themselves or a family, so I have a day job as a social worker for a private company in central Missouri called Sedalia. At the time, I worked in and around a small rural community called Windsor in Henry County. My job took me to all over eastern Henry County, often in rural areas down dirt roads through thick forests. I don't recall the exact day or even month, but sometime in the spring of 2018, I was driving on a rural road south of Windsor specifically. I was driving south on Evans Road. Note, in Windsor, this is a county line road because it is the county line between Henry and Pettis counties. Just south of the eastward turn to Brandon Road, Evans Road makes an L shape. You can see this in Google Maps of the area. That turns the road from north-south to east-west. When heading south, to your left is an open field so you can see if there is anything around the bend on the east-west turn. Seeing there wasn't, I took the turn, then glanced at something on my phone, probably changing a song, when I looked up and saw a boy in the middle of the road. I wasn't going very fast. You don't make a turn on a dirt road fast unless you want to land in a ditch, but if I hadn't turned fast, I would have hit him. He remained stationary in the road, and I sailed past him as I laid on the brakes and skidded to a stop. I saw him out of the side of my eyes as I passed him very close. Despite this, he didn't seem in any way troubled by almost getting hit by my SUV. It was only when I passed very close that I got a glimpse of his eyes. Black. At the time, I thought nothing of it and assumed it was a trick of the light or part of the stress. Or maybe he was wearing sunglasses. Whatever the case, I didn't think anything of it at the time. I was just worried I might have hit a child. Once my vehicle was stopped, I opened the door and jumped out to see nothing. No one. No boy and no sign of a boy. Yes, I could feel him. I feel like I was being watched, and I got the sense that he was on the other side of my vehicle. I started to walk around it, thinking he was hiding from me because he was scared, understandably. I called out to him, then dropped to my knees to look under my SUV to see if I could find his feet and know how far from me he was on the other side of the vehicle. I saw nothing. I backed away from the parked SUV, far enough that I would see if anything emerged on either side, and waited. Nothing. Yet the whole time I had a feeling of being watched. It's hard to explain, but it felt like the dread you get when your teacher scolds you for doing something, then watches you for a while after. Like you know if you make another mistake, you're going to get scolded again. After a while, waiting around just felt stupid, so I got in my vehicle and left, still in a daze from what just happened. I messaged my wife and a couple of my friends about it, but there was nothing else to do. I spoke to some locals about local ghost legends, but there was nothing about a boy haunting that road. There is an old cemetery not far from there, and Windsor is a very old community, so there is a high likelihood of some hauntings, but nothing about that road being haunted by a boy ghost. The feeling of being watched persisted no matter where I went for the next few hours, but was most intense when I was in my vehicle. It's worth noting that when I got out of my SUV, I left my door open, and when I was circling the vehicle at one point, the door was on the other side, so he could have jumped in there before I looked under it for his feet. It didn't occur to me at the time to search the inside of the vehicle. In a way, I'm glad I didn't. I left it alone after that, and it only ever came up again when my friends wanted me to relay the creepy story to others. Coincidentally, my voice tutor is a member of a local ghost hunting group, and I talked with him about it. He asked if the boy frightened me. I said yes, but not because I thought he wanted to hurt me. More like the same kind of dread you'd get being scared by a stranger. You just don't know what they want. It might be harmless, it might not. A few months passed and nothing. Over the summer I started walking at night to exercise. I often did this at night as my day job keeps me at work long hours and evenings are the only times I have. So I'm usually walking around 8 or 9. I like to listen to horror narrations and documentaries about paranormal and unsolved mysteries. I usually load these up on my iPhone and listen as I walk. I live in a small town called Coal Camp, just south of Sedalia, Missouri. It too is a very old town with a fair share of ghost stories. It was even the site of a Civil War battle. I noticed sometimes while walking I'd get that feeling again, like I was being watched. I would look around expecting to see someone looking at me, but there would be nothing. Coal Camp is a small town, and it's rare to cross paths with someone else that time of night. However, from time to time I would catch a glimpse of the outline of a boy, often in the shadows of someone's yard or an alley, only to have it vanish when I look back a second time. This has happened at least a dozen times, and it happened again as recently as last week, which brings me to my latest encounter, which is by far the strangest after the initial. While walking, I started listening to a YouTube video about black-eyed children. This was a compilation of spooky stories about them. While listening, my iPhone started acting funny. It would randomly skip to the next video, forcing me to jump back and find my place in the first one. My iPhone never does this. Cole Camp is literally in the middle of nowhere, so 4G is spotty at best. However, when it gives out, it usually just buffers or freezes. I've never had it just skip an entire video. I eventually assumed that there was something wrong with that video and went to another one. It wasn't what I wanted anyway. I wanted theories about black-eyed children. I had already started suspecting that was what I was dealing with, and I needed some real data. I found a roundtable discussion video about them and started listening to that as I walked. It continually did the same thing, jumping around like the first video. That was when I felt it again. Him. I felt like I was being watched. I turned to look up the street where I sensed he was standing, but saw nothing. I turned back around as my head passed over a row of houses. I caught a silhouette of him in an alley between two houses near a tree. I didn't realize I'd seen him at first, but when I did, I looked back and he was gone. I promptly returned home, but I have to stipulate that I wasn't really scared. I just felt compelled to return home. I don't think he means to harm me, and if he did, he'd had plenty of chances already, but I just felt I needed to be home. I played a random video as I walked home and experienced no more jumps. Once I was home, I locked the door and switched to YouTube on my TV. My wife was at choir practice, so I was home alone with our 4 cats. Once inside, I didn't feel him anymore. I started the video again, and it was playing fine for a while until it froze. As soon as that happened, I noticed my cat Arya pointing her nose at the front door, growling lowly. Arya is our most aggressive, territorial cat, also the smallest, so it's kinda cute, and she's most likely to confront an intruder. But she never hisses at a closed door, even where there is a neighborhood cat on the other side. If the big door is open and she can see out the screen door, she just stares down the other cats to let them know this is her place. She never growls unless the other cat is inside or near her, like if we open the door so there isn't a barrier. What I'm saying is that this was unusual behavior for her, but not out of character. If Arya sensed a threat on the porch that a door might not stop, she would have behaved in exactly this manner. Meanwhile, I had an overwhelming sense that I should not go to the door or look outside. Not dread, just knowing I shouldn't. The YouTube video would not play at all. I remember my front door security camera, which feeds to an app on my phone, and activated it. All I saw was a black screen. I assumed my app was down and restarted it, but nothing. I called my wife and asked her to check hers. She did and said hers was black too. Then, while I was on the phone with her, she said, "Oh, it's back." I grabbed my phone and looked, and sure enough, I could see the porch. Arya ceased hissing and walked off to do other cat business. I no longer felt the need to avoid the door, and when I looked myself, I saw everything was clear. Aside from this, the only other strangeness has been that I cannot add videos about black-eyed kids to my watch later list on YouTube. I can put them there, and they are there if I look immediately, but if I wait any length of time, they're deleted. It's been almost a week and I haven't been walking. I've actually been very sick this weekend, but I'm feeling better, so I haven't encountered him again. I no longer fear him, if I ever did. I don't think he wants to hurt me, as he could have already if he wished it. He's never knocked on my door or attempted contact, but I've never spoken to him either. Every time I feel him, I would try to say something. I don't get a feeling of maliciousness from him, only curiosity. My wife incidentally calls herself a cautious believer in these things, but she does not believe in black-eyed children specifically. She believes my initial encounter was a legitimate ghost sighting, but everything that has followed has been the product of my own overworked and highly creative mind, which is fair. I also know that this encounter is atypical of black-eyed children in that they tend to be malicious and sadistic, and are not shy about approaching people. Perhaps this one was touched that I got out of my vehicle to check on him after I almost hit him instead of driving away. There's no need to warn me of the risks. I already know not to let him into my home. If he comes to my door, I'll talk to him through it. Again, he's never tried this, though. I'm at a loss for understanding this. This is not my first paranormal experience, but It is by far the most intriguing. My previous paranormal experiences do not seem connected, but if anyone wants to hear them in order to find a commonality, I'd be happy to share those as well. At the house I grew up in, my parents had a rocky relationship. Actually, all of us had one with my mom, who was always in the basement. Anyways, the only activity I remember in the house was seeing a ghost boy that I thought was my little brother, bringing it up to my dad because I didn't believe in ghosts. I thought I was crazy, but he said he saw it a few months earlier. My dad's sister is very into the supernatural, claims she can see supernatural things, and said that the boy's name was Sam. Other than that, the only activity in the house was when we were playing with toys in the basement alone, and after a long period of time, you just got uncomfortable out of nowhere, like you were being watched and had to get out of there. I don't know if that's paranormal or just kid stuff. My mom believed in everything as far as I know. Ghosts, psychics, fortune tellers, etc., and hated going to church and stopped our family when I was young. She had us cleanse our house with frankincense and myrrh regularly, which, if you don't know, helps get rid of bad energy, apparently. She was a very greedy object-based person who was also an alcoholic and ruined her relationship with everyone on both sides of our family and has very few friends. So she brought a lot of negative energy to the house and family. Anyways, just giving some background information. During the divorce, my dad swore he saw her face change when they were arguing one time. Also, she went and talked to my little brother, who said she had an odd voice and looked on her face while she kept referring to him as Sam, which was the ghost boy's name and nothing close to his name. Both were very creepy experiences to hear. When my parents finalized their divorce, my mother moved out. I was at my university, so I got to miss that, fortunately. But when I came back for summer after my lease ended was when the odd stuff started happening. I got home late around midnight and moved my stuff into the basement. I put my mattress down, got my sheets on it, and threw my 40 bags full of clothes into a pile and was getting ready to sleep because I was tired. My dad has 2 dogs who came downstairs to sleep with me. Normally they aren't allowed and are kept out by a locked gate, but they hadn't seen me in a while, so my dad let them downstairs. Only the dogs wouldn't sleep. They were staring at the corner in the basement for 5 minutes with their ears perked up. The one of them started defensively growling. A minute or so later, both of them ran upstairs. I said, forget this, I'm uncomfortable now, and got out of there and went upstairs as well. Main floor and basement is all we have, and I went to sleep on the couch. I fell asleep on the couch, forgot about what happened, and was woken up by some loud rustling in the basement around 3 a.m. Immediately I think, crap, the dogs got into the basement. When I went towards the steps, the noise stopped as if whatever knew it had my attention. I unlocked the locked gate and went to see all my bags just as I left them. Nothing out of place, but I still thought it was my dogs, so I looked everywhere for them. Couldn't find them, so I went upstairs and found them in my brother's room sleeping with him. Cue my goosebumps and fear because I just realized it couldn't have been my dogs. In the morning I tell my dad. He thinks it might be mice even though there are no signs of them anywhere. We set up traps for mice. That night the rustling happens again. I don't go to investigate, I just get off the couch and sleep on the floor in my brother's room because I didn't want to be alone. The following day I go and put all my clothes in the dresser and closet and get rid of the bags that the noise is coming from. The rustling stops and no rodents were caught in a few weeks. I got comfortable after a while with no activity and began sleeping on my bed again in the basement. I was up late every night because I worked second shift, 2 to 10 p.m., and played video games with friends until at least 2 a.m. very often. Cue the creepy stuff. Cupboards would creak open fully. One night when everyone in my house went out to eat, my desktop computer was pushed 80% off the desk down there and was hanging by the power cord when we got home. We cleansed the house with the help of my dad's sister. Activity throughout the summer ceased and I moved back to school in the fall. My other brother moved back in and was living in the basement. He claimed weird stuff and someone shaking his bed down there. Whenever I go back, he says the activity increases a lot down there. In November of this year, I was staying at this spooky house for a job interview in that area. I was sleeping in my dad's bed because he was sleeping at his girlfriend's house, and he knows I hate sleeping on the couch. I wake up in the morning to what felt like someone smacking the bed extremely hard, and even made the noise. I tried to make sense of it, but couldn't. I brought it up, and my brother, who was residing in the basement, says it's fairly common occurrence for him down there. I was just there for Christmas and was downstairs on my computer when I hear some rustling in the other corner of the basement. Lights were on, and it was the middle of the day. Plus, I am used to expecting things there, so it didn't scare me. I have nightmares about my dad's house, specifically the basement closet, very often. That's the only thing that affects me when I am elsewhere, until now. I am back at my house now for the first time since Christmas. I was woken up on my first night back by my lacrosse ball rolling against the floor, against the slant, so it came uphill and smacked the wall with some force below my bed. I know that sound because I roll my feet a lot with it and sometimes it escapes from me. I'm scared, so I gather courage and turn on my light. I check under my bed and the ball isn't there. It's on the other side of the room where I left it. I don't think it was a dream because I heard the ball roll back a few inches from the force of hitting the wall after I was fully awake. I'm freaked out and wanted to share. I'm hoping whatever it is at my dad's doesn't follow me to my house. If anything else happens, I'm going to cleanse everything that was in my dad's house that is now here, and I'm hoping it was just another nightmare. My daughter, who's 2.5, woke up in the middle of the night at 3 a.m., hungry. I prepared some oatmeal, fed it to her, and then put her back to bed. She's sleeping together with my wife. Normally, she talks a little bit and then dozes off. I was preparing to go to bed as well, then I heard some commotion coming from the bedroom. I thought she was playing, but she sounded a little bit more serious than usual, and then I hear my wife calling for me. So I went to them and asked, "What's going on, honey?" And my daughter said, "Daddy, you need to help the floating little girl." While looking at the wall that's at the right side of the bed, I assumed that there was some kind of light reflection that was playing games on her imagination, so I just turned the hallway light off and said, "There, the little girl's gone. Let's go back to sleep." But she was having none of it and kept on saying, "Daddy, what is that floating little girl doing? You need to help the floating little girl." At that point, my wife started to freak out a little bit and clench my hand. I just wanted to get back to sleep, so I laid down near my daughter and said, "Hey, floating little girl, it's nighttime now. You need to go to bed. You need to go to your home. Please leave now." Then I turned to my daughter saying, There. She left now. She's going to go to bed with her mommy as well." And then my daughter climbed on me and started saying loudly, "Little girl, I'm mad at you. Little girl, I'm mad at you." While focusing on a certain point near the wall area. I was holding her and I could feel her little heart beating really fast. She was saying all of this with real conviction, and there was not an ounce of play in what she was doing. My wife was clenching my hand really tight and I could feel her nails getting buried into my skin. I thought, what is doing this? And started saying, "We're mad at you, little girl. Go home now, we want to sleep." That somehow calmed my daughter a little bit, and she climbed on top of her mom and went back to sleep. I have no idea to this day what happened that night. I would consider this post more substantial than my last two, but let me start by saying that I've always been interested in the things that can't be explained by science or logic, whether it's ghosts, poltergeists, aliens, or whatever. I definitely see myself as a skeptic, or did, but still I find this subject fascinating. I love watching ghost sighting videos and those top 10 scary thing compilations. Me and my girlfriend have been living together for almost 6 years in this one house, although we are planning on giving our tenancy notice in the next month. As a couple, we've experienced a lot of ups and downs while living there. Loss of family members, my granddad being the most recent last September. Bouts of depression and anxiety from both of us, and lethargy mainly from myself during the last 3 years. We are usually happy, bubbly people, but for a long time now, we've been fed up and generally a bit down in the dumps. And also for a long time, we've been so desperate to get out of this house because it just seems to be draining us. Whether that's because of a sort of cabin fever, being a small house, or something else, we don't know. There's a bit of background on us, and now for the parts you're here for. About 6 months ago, we've been watching some H3H3 on YouTube. Gotta love Ethan and Ela. My girlfriend fell asleep first as always, and she can literally fall asleep mid-conversation, which I find strange, but hey. I got up to use the bathroom, then got into bed and fell asleep. I woke up suddenly at an unknown time, freezing cold with my girlfriend having claimed the covers. I was facing away from her, pulling the sheets back over to my side, and she was pulling them back to her side. At first, it was like subconscious half-asleep sort of thing, but then she dragged the covers over so hard that it knocked my fists into my own nose, making my eyes water. And at the same time, I heard a deep voice say, "Get off!" really quickly. That was not my girlfriend's voice, so I immediately flipped over to see what her problem was. Nobody was there, not even my girlfriend. My heart nearly exploded and my stomach dropped. I was frozen in fear for what felt like hours. I knew this was real. I was awake and fully aware of what was going on. My girlfriend came into the room a minute or two later with a coffee, then started to do her makeup routine for work, so this must have been around 5 to 6 a.m., and I just lay there and somehow managed to fall back asleep. The next day I felt fine, almost like it never happened, but my nose was killing me, so I know it did. I found the contrast of feeling intense fear a few hours earlier, and then extreme calm upon waking quite strange considering what had happened. Nothing was mentioned to my girlfriend. A few strange things have happened between then and this incident, but I'll just tell you this for now, as it's one that I really can't shake. 3 days ago I was sleeping and I was again woken up by this time. My girlfriend's face was less than an inch away from mine and she looked angry. In fact, she looked demented, wide-eyed, shaking and almost snarling. I very nearly crapped myself and jumped out of my skin and shouted, "What are you doing?" She slowly moved away from me but never took her eyes off me. She climbed out of bed, walked around the bed and headed out of the room, all while staring at me with the most disturbing, angry, wide-eyed, scary face. Just as she was leaving the room, her face slowly started to pull a sickening grin, as if she had accomplished what she set out to do, and then slammed the door so hard that it shook the house. I didn't dare go after her. No chance. I felt sick to my stomach, and I'd never been so scared in my life. That was not my girlfriend. She came back minutes later, perfectly normal, and asked if I was okay. I couldn't speak to her, so I went downstairs and just smoked like a chimney until I could get ready for work. Again, nothing has been mentioned to her. The second event here was by far the scariest, despite the first one involving invisible forces and voices. It was just so disturbing. Her face was so contorted it didn't look like her. Truly horrible. I even feel sick writing this now. Could my fascination with the paranormal have anything to do with this? Please, I need answers. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe and click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/Let's Read Official, and give and receive feedback from the community, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And join my Discord to interact with me and other listeners directly. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt. Links in the bio. Thanks so much, friends, and I'll see you again soon.